So that's the game plan. So let's go ahead and be sensitive to everybody's time and kind of move forward. We will be providing you information afterwards. You'll receive a copy of the PowerPoint. You'll receive any notes. Yesterday, there were some tools that some schools have already put into place that we are able to share as well. So we'll provide that to all the participants after the conference, as well as the presentation part of this is being recorded. We can't record your discussion groups. That's why the notes are important. So that'll be available as well, because we've had some folks who weren't able to participate and have reached out looking for information about the web conference yesterday. So just in terms of context and a little bit of background, I think if you've been in the state of Indiana, you're aware of most of this. But to date, for a student to graduate in the state of Indiana, they had to meet requirements of a diploma. Historically, we had 4 diplomas. Now we have technically 1 diploma with 4 different designations, and we'll talk about that just very briefly in a second. But you also had to pass a GQE. And that's typically that's at the high school level. It has been either an end of course assessment, or now currently it is the I-Step 10. There are some waiver processes in place, both in the old model, but if you look on the right side of the slide, it talks about the model moving forward, and what we call graduation pathways, which technically goes into effect with the graduating class of 2023. That means this year's 8th graders going into 9th grade will be the first graduating class that will be required to use these new graduation pathway requirements. Unlike the requirements in the past, with graduation pathways, there are 3 different buckets that students will need to meet the requirements of to be able to graduate. We'll talk about those buckets here in a second and give you kind of an overview of that before we get into our discussion groups. Again, there is still some waiver process. It's focused on the 3rd bucket, which is post-secondary readiness. That's available if a student fails 3 different options in that 3rd bucket. They're able to apply for a waiver. There are requirements in terms of the student's grade point average and attendance to be eligible for those waivers. So that's kind of where we've been and where we're going, and let's talk a little bit more specifically now about where we're going in terms of graduation pathways in the 3 different buckets. You can see here from the overview slide that the first bucket is, again, meeting the requirements of a high school diploma and one of the 4 designations that we have in the state of Indiana. There currently some legislation at the State House that's looking at an alternative diploma as well for students with special needs. The 2nd diploma deals with employability skills, and we're going to talk a little bit more about these buckets here as we move forward. And then the one that's probably the most challenging is in the post-secondary readiness competency, which is the 3rd bucket. And a student has to meet only one of these potential 9 options that are available to them. And we'll talk more specifically about those as we walk through the conversation. Again, if you do have questions, feel free to chat those, and we'll try our best to kind of keep track of that, either myself or Heidi, to see if we can answer those questions for you. So let's talk first of all about bucket 1, which is basically meeting the diploma requirements. As I mentioned earlier, there are 4. There is the Core 40, which is the one that we are most familiar with. There's an academic honors, there's a technical honors diploma, and there is a general diploma. Students have to opt out of the first 3 to be able to request participation, or the family request participation in the general diploma category. Most colleges are looking for an academic honors, although some will accept a Core 40 as well. Not a whole lot of change in diplomas. Like I said, we went from 4 diplomas to 1, but with 4 designations. When we talk about bucket 2, this is something that's a little bit different. And this really came from the business community, saying that sometimes kids graduate high school and they have really good content knowledge, but they're missing the soft skills, to be really successful in a work environment. knowing to show up on time, how you interact with folks. And so the attempt has been that this employability skills calls students to take on some type of a project that will demonstrate those soft skills. And there are 3 different areas in which students can do that, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. There are requirements in terms of what needs to be done for students to be able to kind of check that off the list in terms of being able to graduate. And there are some benchmarks that have been established through the Department of Workforce Development that deals with employability skills, and they kind of fall into 5 different areas. They talk about mindsets, they talk about self-management skills, they talk about learning strategies, they talk about social skills, and they talk about workplace skills. And the intent is that whatever option in the employability skill bucket, that they need to be able to demonstrate these 5 types of skills to show their workforce readiness. This gives you the 3 different options that students are able to pursue. And some schools are, especially at the high school level, are kind of focusing on 1 or 2 of these in particular. And as you know, most of our faith-based schools have a service requirement as a part of graduation. So a lot of our faith-based schools are looking at the service-based option. So you can demonstrate those employability skills either by doing a project-based experience, a service-based experience, or a work-based experience. When we talk about service, it's not just someone participated in a canned food drive at Thanksgiving. It's a more in-depth process that has some type of student work product that's required at the end. And there are some design principles that must be included as a part of putting that process together. And I don't remember if I have a slide. I went over that with the high school, probably not as germane to our elementary school leaders, but just to give you an example, the design principles for service learning in particular, it has to be meaningful service. It has to link back to the curriculum somehow. It must require some type of reflection. There needs to be a diversity of options available to students. It must be done in partnership with some community organization. There must be a way of monitoring the student's progress, and there must be sufficient duration and intensity in that particular experience. And that's the design principles just for the service-based experience. Each of those 3 opportunities have their own design principles that schools must meet to utilize that for students. I know in the discussions we had with the high school folks yesterday, there were some folks who did have required service, but many of them said that they were going to have to expand upon that to meet some of those design principles. A couple others said that they were going to opt to go into a more project-based experience rather than altering their service experience that they currently had in place. But that's really bucket 2, that last part talks about, and that's the URL to get to those employability benchmark skills that I alluded to in those 5 different categories on the prior slide. So that's just a little bit about bucket 2. It's something that's a little bit different. I think the intent is very good in terms of being able to to master soft skills or to have some experience in that soft skills area. I'm not sure if this just becomes a checkbox, which is one of the challenges, I think, with this 3-bucket approach. If you look at the 3rd bucket, which is the post-secondary readiness competency, and the students, as I said earlier, have to meet one of these 9 options. And most of these are probably familiar to you. They have to either get an honors diploma, they have to meet the college readiness benchmarks for an ACT or the SAT scores. I think if I remember correctly, for the ACT, it's an average of 22 across the various different categories. And the SAT, it's like a 110 combined with math in reading. The ASVAB, if you're not familiar with that, is the kind of a military screening exam. Although it's really, as I understand, has a lot more uses than just screening for military, and it can be used as a career awareness kind of tool as well. There is a minimum score for each of the branches of the military, and the requirement for graduation pathways is to meet the lowest branch, which is the Army, and that's a score of 31. There is some concern that a lot of folks may be using the ASVAB as kind of a default if students can't master one of the other areas. It's not really the design. The design is that it's leading people in a pathway, which would typically mean that they were considering the military in some fashion. Industry certificates is another option, and those are approved certificates that can be found online. There are IT related, there are medical related. Those are usually done in partnership either with a career tech ed center or with a place like Ivy Tech. And some of those are very simplistic and others are very complex. Some of the challenges that our high schools have is they don't have access to some of these workforce development options. Number 5, and I think I must have lost my number 6 on the apprenticeship, and number 7, the CTE concentrator, are all more workforce development related options. And many of our high schools don't have equitable access to that, which leads them to the more testing-based kind of options, which we have found to be problematic, especially for some of our kids who aren't good test takers. Number 6 is federal apprenticeships, and that's formally with particular businesses who have been approved to do that. In all honesty, that's probably the option that I know least about, but there is a list on the DOE website. If you haven't explored that, if you really want a crash course in all of the graduation pathways, just go to IDOE/Grad Pathways, and their webpage on graduation pathways has extensive resources on all of these different options, and even provides links to different kinds of tools and resources that you could take advantage of. The 7th one is a CTE concentrator. Again, those are typically things that are available through a career tech ed center. It requires students to get a C in 2 upper level CTE courses, non-duplicative. They can't be the same course, and it can't be an introductory course as well. One that our schools are more familiar with are typically students taking AB or IB or dual credit courses, and that requires a C average in 3 different courses. Something that's new to our folks, that are other options that are available, used at some schools, is a Cambridge International program or a CLEP exam. CLEP is another college board product, like the SAT. It's an exam, but it doesn't necessarily have an associated course, although there are some tutorials out there that folks can use to prepare for CLEP exams, but just provides another option for kids. And then finally is something that's called the locally created pathway. And our hope was that that was going to be kind of a panacea. You know, if we didn't have options in our schools that some kids would be able to meet, that this would be something that we could develop, although they put some pretty rigid guardrails on getting these locally created pathways approved. And there's only 2 currently approved by the state board. One is kind of a fine arts pathway, and the other is something to do with the RV industry up in northern Indiana. But once a pathway is approved, any school can use it, as long as it keeps pretty close to what the parameters in the original design that was approved. We had gathered a group of high school leaders a few months back looking at developing a locally created pathway. Some of the preliminary feedback we got from state board was not positive, so we kind of put it on the back burner, but in some subsequent conversations with the Department of Ed, I think we're going to revisit it. We were hoping to develop what we called a ministry locally developed pathway that would be something that could be used ecumenically across various different types of ministries. And we're hoping to kind of revisit that since the Department of Ed seemed to think that there may be some merit, as did some board members, but state board staff originally was not real enthusiastic, so we kind of moved it to a back burner. So that's kind of the overview, and I didn't get into some of the things in the same depth as I did with the elementary school or the high schools yesterday, but I'm going to just take a quick pause there to see if anybody has questions. And so if you want to either chat a question or if you want to unmute your phone and ask a question, now's the time to do that, and then we'll move on. Hearing no questions, seeing no chat questions, I'm assuming that means that I've been very descriptive and thorough in my explanation, but feel free, whether it be now or later, if you have questions as it relates to you, especially at the elementary school level, to reach out. So what's all this have to do with elementary schools? What's your role in this? Well, in graduation pathways.
Tom, I have a question.
Oh, we have a question. Hold on. On the ACT, Bob, my understanding is the question was for the ACT, must all benchmarks be met individually or just the average of 22? My understanding is they have to be met individually, not just by average. So for clarification, and that's true as well with the SAT. And I can't remember the exact numbers. It's 5 something for English language arts and 4 something, but it comes out to a 10-10 if you add them together. So the elementary schools, if a student goes into high school and they're going to be asked to kind of start picking their graduation pathway, and they have not had any conversation prior to that at the elementary or middle school level, it's going to be kind of shell shock. And so the charge to our elementary and middle schools is what can we be doing to prepare students to give them experience in becoming more aware about different kinds of careers, exploring those careers in some level of depth, so that when they go to high school and have to look at what kind of course of study they need to pursue to kind of move into that pathway, that they've had some conversation and some study at the elementary and middle school level. And that's kind of the challenge, you know, to our elementary and middle schools to help prepare students for those high school decisions when they start scheduling courses. This definition comes directly off the DOE website. The DOE website has a middle school toolkit, they call it, which has some very good resources around career exploration or career planning. They have links that will take you to particular tools that if you haven't explored that, I would encourage you to do so. But you can see here their definition in career exploration consists of learning how to identify and analyze various career options in terms of what education, training, experience, and competencies are required for success. Exploration includes learning in workplace environments or directly in workplaces to discover and experience what it may be like to work in different occupations. It also involves learning how to evaluate how well a career matches or fits one's own interests, skills, strengths, and work values. In that DOE website on the toolkit, there is a course that can be offered, and there's the course description can be found on the DOE website that can be taught at the 8th grade level. Exploring college and careers, it goes through and gives learning standards, something that you might want to consider as well. Let me see, I have another chat question here. Oh, okay. The link to that toolkit Heidi just sent out via chat to everyone, so you can explore that as well. When we talk about career and academic planning, and this kind of is something that's on the cusp of both upper middle school grades going into high school, that planning equips students and their families with the tools necessary to make more informed choices about secondary and post-secondary education and training as it leads to careers. Students should develop a graduation path as both a learning process and a planning document for academic, career, and technical education, dual credit coursework, workplace learning, and activities aligned to those career goals. So your role is really to prime the pump, and I know all of our schools have done some type of career exploration or career awareness, whether that be career fairs or inviting alumni in to kind of to discuss, on a career day. But this is really asking elementary and middle schools to be much more intentional, much more strategic about how they integrate that into their overall probably 5 to 8 school programs. Any questions about that? All right, you've listened to me enough. Now we want to take some time for you all to listen to each other. And here's how we're going to do that. We're going to take the next maybe 25, 30 minutes. And I'm going to encourage you, we will be sending out some instructions via chat. So make sure that once we divide you into your groups that you watch your chat. This is where you're going to need those discussion questions that Heidi emailed out to everyone. But once we break you in to these discussion groups, what we need you to do is very quickly through a round robin introduce, and there'll probably be 5 or 6 participants in each of those discussion groups. Do a quick round robin in terms of introducing yourself, your name, school that you're from, what your position is, and the birth month and date of your birthday, not your year. We don't want to get into identifying anybody's age. We just want the birth month and birth date, and we'll tell you why. Primarily because when you break up into those groups, we need to have someone who's willing to lead the discussion with those discussion questions, and someone that can be the same person or someone different to record the discussion. And you can do that 2 ways. Once you get broken up into groups and you do the round robin introduction, someone can say, hey, I have no problem, I'll lead the discussion, and someone will say, I'll take notes, and whether, like I said, it can be the same person. If no one volunteers, the default is the person's birthday who's closest to today is the winner. And you get to be the leader, and you can choose to record, or you can pick the recorder if you want to, since you won the prize. But someone needs to lead that discussion, and I will be kind of channeling into the different discussion groups to see how things are going. But someone needs to volunteer to take the lead, or if you're lucky and your birthday is tomorrow, happy birthday, but you also get the lead and determine who's going to do the recording. Important that we take notes for these discussion questions. I probably had 3 or 4 emails last night from folks who weren't able to make the web conversation yesterday, so we're sending out that material to them. So these notes will be synthesized and sent out as well. And we're going to ask you to email those notes to Heidi after the web conversation today. I'll share her email address when we, in just a minute, when we come back to report. So then after, we'll give you the 25 to 30 minutes, and then we'll come back and we'll ask the leader or the recorder to report out for each of those groups. And we're going to ask you to report out in 3 areas based on what you heard. What were some neat best practices that you heard from some schools? What is some schools doing that, merit other folks hearing about and maybe learning about? And again, and in those best practices, if somebody has any kind of tools that they're willing to share, let us know about that too, and we can email those out to everybody as well. Any challenges consistently that you're hearing across schools that maybe as they look at doing their part here with graduation pathways. And then the final thing is, what do you need to know more about, and how can we, what kind of information should we provide for you to help you kind of embrace this, ensure our kids are getting the kinds of preparation they need as they move into graduation pathways. So here's your discussion questions. First of all, what's your overall understanding of graduation pathways? Where are you? Is this something that was kind of brand new to you today? Is it something you kind of picked up bits and pieces? Or is it something that you kind of dug into and you have a pretty good grasp of? You know, what is your school currently doing, or what do you hope to do around career awareness and exploration in light of graduation pathways? What grades are you looking at doing this in? You know, has your school partnered with any kind of employers or community organizations in career exploration or activities, or do you plan to? And what kind of creative ways are you looking at doing in terms of giving kids these experiences? Looking at things like job shadowing or some kind of mentoring or career fairs. What other kind of things are you looking at? Have you had any interaction with your high schools regarding graduation pathways? And then again, what kind of information do you need? So those are the discussion questions. Hopefully you have those in writing with you now as well. In just a minute, Heidi's going to share with you specifically what's going to happen as we divide you into the small groups, and then we will periodically chat out updates, and I will kind of be moving from discussion group to discussion group.
All right, it's going to be really simple. I'll divide you up into probably 3 different groups with about 5 people in each group. What will happen is you'll get a little notification that'll say you've been invited to enter into breakout group 1 or breakout group 2, whichever. All you have to do is click join, and just let probably a minute go by or so to let everyone be able to join the group, and then you can get started.
Any questions? All right, we'll be dividing you up. Please hang in there till the end through the discussion groups, and then coming back for the report out. And then you will receive, everybody on the call will receive information emailed out, you know, in the very near future. So have a good conversation. I'll be kind of joining you in and out as we talk through some of this and learn from each other. Well, welcome back. I was probably the only one to have the pleasure of visiting all the discussion groups, and some really good conversation going on. Shout out to both the leaders and the recorders. I'm not sure if you made it through all of the different questions, but what I'd like to do now is just have folks kind of report back. And what I'll do is I want to start with kind of best practices, and that may not be the right term, good ideas that you've heard of folks of what they're doing or what they hope to do. Let's start with, hey, Bob Payne, what did you guys hear in your group in terms of best practices?
Best practices. Trish, are you there? Trish was.
Oh, Trish is the one who's going to. I'm sorry, Trish. I forgot you were the one that's going to report out.
Yes, I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yep. Yep. Sure.
Okay. So let me go to the top of my notes. Well, first we talked about what our overall understanding was of the graduation pathways. And we all agreed that John's overview was helpful and it increased our understanding. From a middle school perspective, we understand that we need to get our students to think about high school expectations and exposure to the different high school graduation pathways and consider where they want to go. One of our group members had more of an understanding from a high school perspective because of his work experience with K through 12. And the main push here, as we understand it, that the state sees a need to get students ready for jobs if they don't go on to college, and make sure that the worker shortage in Indiana is met and that students have the skills to go directly into the workforce. Let's see. Did you want me to go through all of my notes or just the first question?
Well, I really was just anything that folks at this particular point are doing that as far as career exploration or career awareness that you think, you know, something?
Okay, sorry. So we all agreed that we do things here and there that fit parts of these pathways, but it's not as intentional as we're going to need to be going into the future. And some of those examples are our STEM classes, financial literacy classes, service hour requirements, career days, like perhaps one day a year, where we bring speakers in or have a career fair. The magazine that the state sends out to send home to parents and students, some of us thought that that was useful. Someone mentioned Project Lead the Way is useful. And some teachers have been made aware that they are responsible for doing career lessons. So a little bit of everything, it sounds like, that we just need to pull together into a cohesive unit.
Great. Thank you, Trish. Rob, who's reporting for your group, you or somebody else? Group. Hey, Rob.
Yes.
Who's reporting for your group?
We had Joan for our group.
Okay, Joan?
You hear me?
I certainly can.
Okay.
What kind of good ideas did you all hear? I mean, first of all, I guess what general understanding in your group of the graduation pathways, and then what kind of ideas did you hear about how schools are approaching the career exploration, career awareness?
Okay, for our understanding, I would say generally we all felt like we had maybe what I would call a surface level understanding. We all were aware that it was out there, that it was looming, but because we are elementary, we don't have, you know, the detailed knowledge of the pathway, but we all had some awareness of the expectation that we would be doing something at our level related to careers.
Great.
And as far as best practices go, we had a variety of things related to career days in our schools, different styles of those, working with junior achievement for job shadow in a local program called Job Spark. I had shared that if you have the online program called Achieve 3000, in that program there's a component called the Career Center, where a student can explore careers, read a description of the careers, and then they also see the expected Lexile comprehension level to be successful in that career, and it's matched up with their Lexile, so they can see how far they need to grow in order to reach that Lexile level for that career. So we have those things going on.
Neat, good stuff. Hey, Liz, who's reporting for your group?
I can go ahead and do that.
All righty.
So basically, we all had a pretty good understanding of the pathways already. We're just trying to get into more specifics with Bucket 2 with some of the service-based, project-based learning, and then also the work experience out there, just trying to see accountability and stuff, how to explain that to our students at especially the junior high level as they move on to high school, and then understanding just a couple of the options in the third bucket. But it seems like there's a lot of career awareness that is needed just across the board, that we're not doing as much as we would like to do. But some of the practices that we did like seeing was that some of the high school counselors have an option at some of the schools to come in and talk to the 8th graders about these graduation pathways, and then also looking at setting up their classes for the next year to get them sort of set in place as they move on to high school the following year. But I think most of us were in agreement that there's a lot more that we would like to be doing and want to do. You know, we talked about career days, we talked about doing more job shadowing experiences at the elementary level. We know that most of those are present at the high school level already, but looking to see how we can work with businesses to encourage more career days and, you know, kind of like take your daughter or son to work day type of thing. So.
Cool. What were some consistent challenges for any of the 3 people who reported out that you're experiencing? Sounds like I just need to kind of to become more intentional and to kind of get a better grasp of, you know, how the whole graduation pathways works and applies to you. Any other kind of consistent challenge that you heard from the folks in your groups?
Ask them to unmute themselves if they want to talk.
This is
Yeah, you'll
Liz
need to
again.
unmute yourself if you're muted.
This is Liz again, and one of the things we talked about was just looking at different avenues for that career exploration. I know there have been like coin activities in the past, and also some surveys maybe through 21st Century Scholarship where students can explore career pathways before they move on to high school. But I really liked hearing about the Achieve 3000 and the Career Center option within that. And that's something that I think a lot of schools, if they have Achieve 3000 already, that's a great way to explore careers for them.
Neat.
This is Joan.
How about,
Oh,
go ahead, Joan.
I was going to say, we also said some challenges were developing the business partnerships, working with volunteers. Some of the programs, you might be able to get volunteers to come in for a one-day program or a career fair or something like that. But as far as the mentor piece, you know, getting someone trained, what would the programming look like? What would the safety training look like in our schools? That kind of thing, to get someone to do something more quality, meaningful. That might be, you know, a challenge. Logistics also.
Makes sense. Trish, did you all have any from your group? And you're muted, it looks like. There you go.
Yeah. I'm not sure we specifically talked about challenges, but we did mention that when we talk about partnering from local businesses, that there might be competition from other area schools and could be hard to secure that. Also, it's a challenge considering everything else that needs to be covered during the school year. How do we make it meaningful and apply the time that it takes and still do everything else that we have to do during the school year? So the logistics are hard, and prioritizing, I think, is going to be a challenge these first few years.
Yeah, I agree, and I heard that in your discussion group, yeah. And I think you've alluded to this already in your comments, but any other information that would be helpful for you all to have, to know that, and I'll share with you in a minute, we're planning with INPEA, our INPEA conference coming up September 23rd and 24th, we're doing a whole pre-conference on graduation pathways, and there'll be a session specifically on career awareness and exploration. But is there any other information that would be helpful for us to make available, especially to our elementary school folks?
Hey, John?
Yes.
Yes, Bob. So I guess one piece of this that I don't quite understand, in terms of choosing a bucket, choosing a pathway, how and when does that happen in high school?
Well, I mean, and I'm going to give you the theoretical, Bob, because right now I think everybody's kind of struggling. And I think one thing to remember when we're talking pathways, and this came up, as most of you are probably aware on the call, I was on the graduation pathways panel. But one of the things that came up is that there needs to be some fluidity that kids aren't going to know in 8th grade or 9th grade what they want to be when they grow up. I tell folks all the time, I'm not sure I know what I want to be when I grow up. So there needs to be the ability for people to move from a pathway to a pathway. The intent is that, when they come in 9th grade, they're going to create a plan, that will kind of, at least based on the knowledge at that particular point, not that they're going to be stuck in that pathway if they, explore further and want to move. But, the whole course planning and, getting more information about those pathways and careers and what they need to study at the college level, all of that needs to find its way into the process. But I would assume as they go into 9th grade, they're going to be meeting with guidance counselors and kind of beginning that process of selecting or developing their pathway.
So it sort of strikes me that you want to be advising kids that you want to keep options as open as possible, not choosing something to narrow things down.
Well, especially I think at the elementary and middle school level, you know, it's giving kids some very intentional opportunities to know what's out there and to kind of explore, you know, what the possibilities are, and in a very intentional way. You know, you kind of joke, I want to play with the NFL, you know, kind of a thing. And, you know, what does that mean and how do you get there? Or if I want to be a teacher or a doctor, or, you know, what kind of courses do I need to study? How long do I need? How much schooling does that require? And kind of really making it more intentional for kids to kind of think through that process. And, you know, again, at the elementary and middle school level, kind of opening that door to here's the opportunities that can be available to you. Here's the kinds of things that are out there that you may have never even, you know, considered. And to begin those, you know, I think there's inventories and different things available, you know, to folks to kind of look at what their interests are and what their skill set is and how does that fit with what they're hoping to do or what they would like to do, or what kind of job opportunities are out there that fit with their interest, their passion, you know, their skill sets, and to kind of just begin that conversation of kids at that early age to start thinking about that.
Right.
But one of the questions,
Any other comments? Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I have
I'm
a
sorry.
question for my middle schoolers. As we begin looking into how we're going to present this and teach this to our students, I want to start off strong with quality instruction and would like to avoid reinventing the wheel and creating something from scratch. And I saw on IDOE that they had about 3 different programs, links to different websites, and they looked okay. I'm familiar with Naviance because some of the high schools in our area use that. So how deep do we need to go at our middle school level? How do we make it a smooth transition going from our one elementary middle school to 2 or 3 or 4 different high schools that our students go out to? It's an interesting task, but it does have some overwhelming components to it because we want to do good diligence to it. But I'm kind of wondering, where do we even get started and how do we find quality instructional material to help us with this?
You know, and I'm not sure, that was Trish, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, if you look at that toolkit on the DOE website, the full toolkit, there are, I'd say, 50 or 60 different kinds of, in different areas, different links that can take you to different kind of resources.
Okay.
I mean, and that's one of the first things that I would look at. And I tell you, you know, it's been a long time since I was an elementary principal, but, you know, I think one of the things that I would do, you know, realizing we're getting towards the end of the year, but if they haven't come to you, and I know you were saying you feed into possibly 5 different high schools, and, you know, I'm sure many of our schools feed into, but I would see if I could, I'd schedule a lunch and invite the high school guidance counselors to come in and say, let's have a conversation about, you know, what your expectations are and what we can do, realizing we're not just feeding into one school. And I think that would be a very healthy conversation to have, you know, here early on. And if the high schools don't take the initiative, as an elementary school who may be feeding into multiple high schools, I think, you know, finding a day, scheduling a lunch, and bringing lunch in and seeing if you could get counselors from the different high schools to come and collectively have a conversation. Probably healthy for the high schools to kind of be a part of that and hear what the other high schools are saying as well. Because I think that, you know, that conversation between the high school and elementary school, I think, could be a very valuable one to have. you know, and I agree with you, tuning into the resources. I think I said we all kind of experiment and dabble in the whole career exploration area, but to get much more intentional about it, you know, I think looking to see what's out there and what we may be able to take advantage of without recreating the wheel. And like I said, they even have 2 courses I know with the course outlines on that website as well, with learning standards associated and learning objectives associated with each. So, I mean, those are some of the things to me that I would think that I would try to do in these early stages. I want to be respectful of folks' time, and unless anybody else has other comments, please email any notes that you have to Heidi here. You can see it on her email address is hharmon@inpea.org, and we'll accumulate that, and we'll send out to you so you get the benefit of all the conversation groups that occurred today. We'll also send you the PowerPoint. We're recording the presentation part of this, so you can have access to that as well. I alluded earlier to hopefully all of you have September 23rd and 24th on your calendar, the INPEA conference, Never Stand Still, Shaping the Future. But we have the morning of the 23rd as pre-conference specifically on grad pathways. Ben Carter from DOE will be there. We've got requests in for some other folks, and there's one session that will be specifically on career awareness and career exploration. So hopefully that'll help continue to provide some helpful information to you all as you kind of work through this and your part in the whole process. These are some the resources, that the middle school kit that Heidi chatted out a little bit ago, the DOE resources in terms of grad pathways and their particular webpage on that, and there's also guidance at the state board website as well. So that's kind of what we had to offer. Hopefully you found this information beneficial. You had the discussion beneficial. This is something that I thoroughly enjoy. This is what INPEA's, one of the real gifts of the organization is to go around into those discussion groups, and we have Christian schools and Catholic schools and Lutheran schools all talking about how we can learn from each other, which is really what INPEA's all about. So it was really neat to hear those discussions going on as I kind of went from discussion group to discussion group. If you have suggestions of how we can continue this conversation outside of the IMPACT pre-conference, please email those to us. And whether that's maybe every once in a while doing a periodic web conversation so that later you'll be able to say, you know, here's what we're doing, you know, based on the conversation we had last time, here's some things we put in place. If you have ideas any way we can support you, happy to do that as well. So greatly appreciate your participation, and feel free to reach out and look for an email from Heidi for follow-up. But thanks for taking the time to be a part of this. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John.